When you close your eyes and let your thoughts drift to the distant past, imagine the warm air of Egypt surrounding you, filled with the scent of dry sand and the faint coolness of the Nile not far away. It is the 5th century before our era, and the Greek historian Herodotus has come here wide-eyed, curious, and eager to understand the wonders of the ancient world. He has already traveled through Asia and Greece, listening to stories, collecting fragments of truth, and shaping them into the histories that would one day carry his name into eternity. He walks the sunlit land of the pharaohs, a land older than his own people can easily comprehend, a place where monuments rise against the horizon and the past seems alive in every stone. Among the marvels he records is one so extraordinary, so detailed in his telling, that it lingers in the imagination like a dream: the Egyptian labyrinth. Herodotus tells us that this labyrinth was not merely a building, not simply a palace or a tomb, but a structure greater even than the pyramids in its impressiveness. The pyramids, with their sheer sides and impossible weight of stone, had already been known to astonish all who gazed upon them, yet he places this hidden marvel above them. Imagine then how immense and intricate it must have seemed to him. Foreigner, guided by priests and interpreters, allowed only a glimpse of the sprawling halls. 12 great courts, he said, were arranged within it, 6 on the north and 6 on the south, all enclosed by one vast wall. Within were passages that twisted and turned, chambers beyond chambers, roofs of stone that seemed to float above without timber, and walls adorned with carvings of gods and beasts. As you rest, picture this description not as a precise architectural plan, but as a gentle unfolding dream. The labyrinth in Herodotus's account becomes less a building of brick and stone and more an echo, a symbol, something half real and half imagined. He speaks of 3,000 rooms, half of them above the ground, half beneath it, though he admits he only saw the upper portion. The lower halls, he was told, were sealed, containing the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles, hidden away from human eyes. Such imagery blurs the line between reality and myth. Perhaps it was this mixture of seen and unseen, spoken and concealed, that left him so deeply impressed, so willing to declare it the greatest wonder of Egypt. To understand why Herodotus gave such weight to the labyrinth, we must remember the world he came from. Greece was filled with temples, theaters, and shrines, yet these were small compared to Egyptian monuments. For the Greeks, who told stories of labyrinths in their own myths, the twisting prison of King Minos that held the Minotaur hearing of an actual labyrinth in Egypt must have stirred both wonder and recognition. Perhaps Herodotus saw in it a confirmation of myth itself, a physical structure that made the legends of his homeland feel more possible. The Greeks knew the power of story, and so did the Egyptians. In this overlapping of traditions, the Egyptian labyrinth became something larger than life, both a marvel of stone and a bridge of imagination. As you breathe slowly, imagine the sun lowering over Egypt, casting long shadows on stone walls and dusty paths. Herodotus, weary from travel, sits with priests who recount the age of kings long past, telling him that the labyrinth was built near Lake Moeris, at a place later known as Hawara. They tell him it was raised by 12 kings who once ruled Egypt together, a symbol of their unity, a monument that reflected their power. He listens, and he writes, and he repeats what he has been told, sometimes in awe, sometimes with doubt, always with that restless curiosity that carried him far from his homeland. Through his words, this vision of the labyrinth passes into history, waiting centuries for others to wonder about it. The labyrinth thus becomes one of those mysteries that refuses to fade. Unlike the pyramids or the temples of Luxor, it cannot be pointed to on a map with certainty. Its stones, if they existed as Herodotus described, have long been scattered or buried. Yet because he wrote of it so vividly, later writers, explorers, scholars have been drawn to the tale, searching for traces, debating its form, speculating on its purpose. It is a ghost of architecture, a building that exists most powerfully not in the desert sands, but in the minds of those who close their eyes and try to walk through its corridors of memory. In this way, the Egyptian labyrinth is a perfect subject for dreaming. It offers no fixed outline, no walls we can still touch. Instead, it offers a suggestion, a hint of hidden chambers and silent halls. To imagine it is to walk in half darkness, guided not by stone but by story. You move along twisting paths. You glance into rooms decorated with gods, You sense stairways that lead deeper and deeper, where tombs lie in eternal stillness. And just as you begin to picture it clearly, it fades into uncertainty, like a dream upon waking, never quite grasped, never fully lost. Herodotus himself was aware of how little he could know for certain. He often reported what others told him, offering it to his readers with a shrug of uncertainty. About Egypt he wrote with fascination, but also with a kind of humility, as though he knew that its past was older and grander than he could fully comprehend. The labyrinth then is both his testimony and his confession. He tells us what he saw and what he was told, but he leaves the final judgment to us centuries later as we wonder whether such a place ever truly existed. As the night deepens in your imagination, think of the labyrinth not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a gentle companion for the mind. Its countless halls become like the winding thoughts before sleep, where one idea drifts into another, where doors open onto rooms of memory, where stairways carry you downward into dreams. This is the gift of Herodotus. Not certainty, but wonder. He offers us the comfort of mystery, the invitation to rest in the unknown. Egypt itself, in his time, was a land already ancient. The temples of Karnak, the pyramids of Giza, the tombs of the Valley of King Zal stood as monuments to dynasties long gone. To the Egyptians, these were familiar, yet to Herodotus, they were almost beyond imagination. By placing the labyrinth above even these wonders, he reminds us that the greatest marvels may be the ones that do not survive, the ones that slip away, leaving only whispers. What is more powerful for the dreaming mind than that which cannot be touched, only imagined? And so the Egyptian labyrinth enters our thoughts as softly as a lullaby. It is a story within a story, a place half seen through the eyes of a wandering Greek, passed down across generations like a lantern carried in darkness. It glows faintly, illuminating possibilities but never certainty. For the one who seeks rest, this is a gentle comfort. It tells us that not all mysteries must be solved. Some can simply be held close, like a secret that soothes rather than disturbs. As part one of this story closes, imagine yourself standing at the threshold of that labyrinth. The stone is cool under your fingers, the air still within the walls. Before you lie halls without number, chambers without end. You do not need to walk them all. It is enough to know they exist, enough to feel the presence of mystery surrounding you. Like sleep itself, the labyrinth invites you inward, deeper and deeper, until you are lost in its embrace. Not with fear, but with calm surrender. The journey has only begun, and already the mind rests easier, lulled by the rhythm of history and dream. Close your eyes and imagine the Nile winding calmly through the desert, carrying life across a land that would otherwise be silent and bare. When Herodotus journeyed into Egypt, this river was the thread holding together a civilization already thousands of years old. Along its banks rose towns, temples, and monuments, each carrying echoes of rulers whose names were half lost to memory. To the Greeks, Egypt was not just a foreign land. It was an ancient teacher, a place where knowledge of the gods, of the stars, of writing and architecture seemed older than time itself. For a traveler like Herodotus, every step along the Nile must have felt like stepping into a living museum, where the past had not vanished but continued to speak. The Egypt of Herodotus's day was not the Egypt of the pyramid builders. It was a country ruled first by Persians and later by local dynasties who struggled to hold their independence. Yet the grandeur of earlier ages remained visible in the vast temples and monuments. Priests served at shrines where rituals had been repeated for generations, and villages lived in patterns shaped by the river's floods, just as they had for millennia. The labyrinth, if it still stood in Herodotus's time, would have been one of these reminders of older greatness. A monument built in an earlier dynasty, carrying the weight of forgotten kings. To understand the labyrinth's significance, picture the setting around Lake Morays, a large body of water in the Fayum region west of the Nile. This lake, partly natural and partly engineered, was said to have been reshaped by human hands to manage floods and irrigation. Near it, at a place called Hawara, rose the structure that Herodotus described. Imagine approaching it. The lake glistening under the sun, reeds along its edges swaying in the warm breeze, and then beyond them, a wall of stone enclosing something vast, mysterious, and silent. For a traveler unused to Egypt's scale, such a sight must have been overwhelming. The Egyptian priests who guided Herodotus told him that the labyrinth had been constructed by 12 kings who once ruled Egypt in unison. This detail hints at a time of unity and cooperation, but also of ambition. For what else could drive rulers to raise such an immense structure if not the desire to outshine their ancestors? The pyramids had already been standing for over 2,000 years. To rival them, something different was needed, not a mountain of stone reaching upward, but a palace sprawling outward, filled with passages and chambers that seemed endless. Herodotus often wove together stories, repeating what he heard, mixing fact with rumor. As he wrote of Egypt, he described customs and practices, some accurate, others strange to modern ears. He spoke of embalming, of sacred animals, of processions and festivals. Through it all, he painted Egypt as a land of wonders, a place where human ingenuity and divine mystery seemed inseparable. In such a setting, the labyrinth fit naturally. It was not a puzzle to trap a monster, as in Greek stories, but a monument of kingship and sacred duty, a house of records, and a resting place for rulers. If you were to walk through Egypt at that time, you would hear the chanting of priests at dawn, smell the incense rising from temple courtyards, and see the endless labor of farmers tending to fields rich with wheat and barley. The Nile's rhythm dictated life, bringing both abundance and danger. To a foreigner, it was all a carefully balanced miracle, a land of life surrounded by endless desert. And at the heart of this miracle stood monuments that seemed impossible in their endurance. The labyrinth, according to Herodotus, was among the greatest of them all, so vast that words failed him. For sleep, let us linger on this atmosphere. Imagine standing at the riverbank at twilight, the air cooling after a hot day, the waters glowing faintly in the fading sun. In the distance, a caravan moves slowly, carrying goods, while boats drift by with tall sails. Somewhere beyond the horizon lies the labyrinth, waiting. It is not urgent to find it. It is enough to know that in this vast land, where gods and men seem to share the same space, such a building could exist. Egypt itself becomes a labyrinth of history, each turn revealing something unexpected. When Herodotus recorded his impressions, he gave readers in Greece more than just travel notes. He opened a window into another world, one filled with mysteries. His descriptions of Egypt blended reality and marvel, so that even today we cannot always separate fact from embellishment. Yet perhaps that is what makes them powerful. If he had described the labyrinth with cold precision, it might have become nothing more than a lost ruin. Instead, he wrapped it in awe, in a sense of grandeur that allows it to live on in imagination. Long after its stones have been scattered, the world around the labyrinth was not just political or architectural, it was spiritual. The Egyptians saw their monuments as living places where the divine and human touched. A hall might be a meeting ground for gods, a chamber, a passage to eternity. The labyrinth, with its countless rooms, might have symbolized the complexity of life and afterlife, the order hidden within seeming confusion. To Herodotus, raised in a culture of myths, this spiritual dimension must have resonated deeply, even if he could not fully grasp it. His words suggest awe, but also respect, a willingness to admit that Egypt's mysteries lay beyond him. Imagine then the scale of contrast between the world of Herodotus and the Egypt he saw. He came from cities like Athens, filled with temples of marble and public squares alive with debate. Here he found temples larger than whole neighborhoods, statues carved from single blocks of stone heavier than ships, and buildings like the labyrinth that sprawled in every direction. To walk in Egypt was to feel small, to sense that human life was only one thread in a tapestry woven across centuries. In such a tapestry, the labyrinth was one more intricate pattern, beautiful, confusing, and profound. As you settle deeper into this story, think of the labyrinth not only as a structure, but as a reflection of Egypt itself. Both were immense, layered, and filled with secrets. Both combined the human and the divine, the visible and the hidden. To step into Egypt was to step into a labyrinth of its own, where each question led to more questions, where each answer was only partial, and where certainty was as rare as the stars appearing in the desert night sky. And so Herodotus recorded what he saw and heard. leaving us with a portrait of Egypt shimmering between history and dream. The labyrinth stands in his account not just as a building, but as a symbol of a world too vast to fully contain. Tonight, as your mind drifts, let Egypt become that vastness for you, a land of water and sand, chaos temples and silence, of corridors both real and imagined. Let the labyrinth wait patiently in the distance, its gates closed, its mysteries intact. As we journey further into its story, part by part, dream by dream, imagine approaching the walls of the labyrinth, as Herodotus might have done, guided by priests and interpreters, who wished to show him only what they chose to reveal. From the outside, it appeared as a long rectangular structure, immense in scale, enclosed by a single wall. There was nothing delicate or small about it. Everything was heavy stone, fitted with such precision that no gap showed between blocks.
Ow.
To a traveler used to Greek stonework, it must have seemed otherworldly in its perfection. The air within the enclosure was cooler, shaded, a contrast to the glaring desert sun beyond. Each step into the complex carried him further from familiarity, into a world designed not only to impress but to overwhelm. Herodotus wrote that the labyrinth contained 12 great courts, 6 to the north and 6 to the south, all symmetrically arranged and connected. Picture them like vast open squares, each surrounded by colonnades, each echoing with footsteps on smooth stone floors. These courts were not merely decorative, they were gathering places, perhaps for rituals, perhaps for councils. The very scale of them suggested purpose beyond simple utility. To walk through one court and then another was to feel caught in a rhythm, as though the building itself was conducting a silent procession of those who entered. Beyond the courts stretched the endless passages that gave the labyrinth its name. Herodotus admitted he could not describe them in full, for he himself grew lost in their twists and turns. Imagine corridors running side by side, doors opening onto chambers that led into further chambers. Some were small, intimate spaces with walls carved in bas-relief, scenes of gods and sacred beasts etched into stone. Others were larger, halls with ceilings so high the sound of a voice dissolved before reaching them. Herodotus wrote that the building seemed to continue without end, each turn revealing more doors, more passages, as if it had no heart but only layer after layer of mystery. In his account, Herodotus tells us that the upper chambers numbered over 1,000. These he walked through, guided but bewildered, marveling at their design. But below, he was told, lay another 1,000, sealed from view, forbidden to visitors. These lower halls, the priests whispered, contained the tombs of the kings who had built the labyrinth, as well as chambers for the sacred crocodiles worshipped in the region. Such secrecy only deepened the sense of awe. It suggested that what he saw was only half of the truth, that beneath the earth stretched an even greater wonder, hidden forever from mortal eyes. Pause here, in imagination, and step into one of the upper chambers. The stone underfoot is smooth and cool. The walls are covered in carvings that flicker in the lamplight. Perhaps you see a procession of priests carved into the stone, or a sacred animal adorned with symbols. You move forward, and the chamber narrows into a corridor, which opens into another room, this one larger, with a ceiling that seems impossibly high. Every space leads into another, every turn invites you deeper, until you no longer know whether you are above or below, north or south. You are simply within the labyrinth, carried along by its design. Herodotus was not one to exaggerate without reason. He compared the labyrinth to the pyramids, and found it more impressive, not in sheer size, but in complexity and artistry. The pyramids were straightforward, immense structures with clear purpose, tombs for kings. The labyrinth was something else entirely, both palace and temple, both meeting place and burial ground. It was, he said beyond words, a building whose scale and intricacy could not be captured in description, and so he left us with fragments, the courts, the chambers, the sealed tombs below. From these fragments we must build our own vision. Let your mind picture the roof as he described it. Each chamber covered not with beams of wood, but with immense slabs of stone, fitted together with skill so perfect that they seemed lighter than air. Imagine the silence of those stone roofs, pressing down with weight, yet giving the impression of timeless security. Above you, carved patterns might catch the flicker of torchlight, sending shifting shadows across the floor. In such halls, the passage of time feels different. Hours stretch into moments, moments stretch into eternity. Herodotus was struck not only by the architecture, but by the artistry of the walls. He wrote that every chamber, every corridor was richly adorned with carvings, each telling stories of gods and beasts. This suggests that the labyrinth was not just an architectural feat, but also a narrative one, a building that told Egypt's stories in stone. Walking through it was like walking through a library of images, each wall a page, each carving a memory preserved. For a culture that valued eternity, the labyrinth was a fitting monument, not just a resting place for kings, but a vessel for history itself. The symmetry of the design impressed him deeply. Each part mirrored another, each court balanced by its twin. To Herodotus, this balance may have symbolized unity, the unity of the 12 kings who supposedly built it, or the unity of Egypt itself. But to us, it also feels like a meditation. Walking through mirrored halls, one becomes calm, lulled by repetition, by the sense that every path leads somewhere both familiar and new. The labyrinth becomes less of a puzzle and more of a rhythm, a steady heartbeat of stone. The priests who guided him likely embellished their stories. They may have woven legend into truth, shaping his impressions with tales of kings and crocodiles. Yet even if half of what he reported was shaped by imagination, the effect remains the same. The labyrinth stands in his words as an architectural dream, a space that grows larger the more you think of it. Its very vagueness makes it powerful, for without precise measurements or drawings, it remains fluid, able to expand endlessly in the mind. For sleep, consider the labyrinth as a metaphor for thought itself. Just as Herodotus wandered its halls, so the mind wanders through its own passages before rest. One chamber of memory leads to another, one corridor of imagination twists into the next. Some doors remain closed, like the sealed tombs below, while others open freely, welcoming you deeper. The labyrinth is not meant to be solved, only walked, step by step, turn by turn, until you lose the distinction between outside and inside, between waking and dreaming. And so Herodotus left us with this image. A building more impressive than the pyramids, filled with chambers beyond counting, alive with carvings. Divided into mirrored courts, half revealed and half concealed. Whether it stood exactly as he described, or whether his words transformed it into something greater, hardly matters. What matters is the wonder it carries, the sense of standing before something too immense for comprehension. As you rest tonight, let that wonder surround you. Walk slowly through its halls, pause in its chambers, and feel the stillness of stone older than memory. In the labyrinth of Herodotus, sleep itself becomes another passage, leading you inward to silence and peace. The pyramids of Egypt are among the most famous monuments in the world, their sharp silhouettes rising against the desert sky. Yet Herodotus tells us that the labyrinth was more astonishing still. To understand this claim, picture yourself standing before the Great Pyramid at Giza, its sides gleaming in the sunlight, smooth and imposing, its weight pressing into the earth with timeless force. It is a monument of simplicity. For faces meeting at a point, a tomb-made mountain. Its power lies in its starkness, in its refusal to be anything but itself. Now imagine the contrast of the labyrinth sprawling, intricate, filled with endless turns and chambers. One overwhelms through height and mass, the other through intricacy and scale. Herodotus may have sensed that the pyramids, for all their grandeur, offered only a single experience. You gazed at them and you were awed. You entered them, and beyond a few passageways, you found emptiness. The labyrinth, in contrast, gave no single impression. It unfolded piece by piece, revealing new wonders at every step. To walk, it was to engage in a journey, to feel the world expanding around you, to sense that no matter how far you went, there was more still ahead. Where the pyramid was a statement, the labyrinth was a story. Think of the way Herodotus described its courts, its chambers, its lower tombs sealed from sight. The pyramids hid their contents, offering only the bare geometry of their outer form. The labyrinth, by contrast, displayed its wealth openly. Every wall, every corridor, every roof slab of stone carried decoration, artistry, and meaning. To compare the two is like comparing silence with music, both powerful but in utterly different ways. The pyramids were, by Herodotus's time, already ancient, their purpose known, their mystery softened by familiarity. The labyrinth was different, stood in a more obscure place, near the Lake of Moeris, and it carried with it a sense of secrecy. Few outside Egypt had seen it, and even within Egypt, only priests could fully understand its significance. This secrecy lent it power. To a traveler, it must have seemed like stumbling upon a hidden treasure, something more exclusive and therefore more marvelous than the pyramids known to all. The pyramids dominated the skyline. The labyrinth dominated the imagination. One could not look at the pyramids without recognizing their might, but one could walk away from the labyrinth and still feel its corridors stretching inside the mind. That lingering presence may have been what struck Herodotus most of all. Long after leaving Hawara, he remembered the endless turns, the chambers without number, the stories whispered of tombs below. The pyramids faded into the background of Egypt's majesty, but the labyrinth remained vivid. For the Egyptians themselves, the comparison may have been less direct. The pyramids belonged to an earlier age, the Old Kingdom, when pharaohs sought eternity in stone mountains. The labyrinth, if built in the Middle Kingdom, as scholars believe, represented a different vision of kingship. It was a collective monument, attributed to multiple rulers, not just one. It served administrative, ceremonial, and funerary purposes all at once. In that way, it reflected the complexity of Egypt itself, less a single statement, more a weaving together of many threads. As you rest, imagine how these two forms of wonder feel side by side. The pyramid is stillness, a silent mountain of stone, unchanging in its form. The labyrinth is movement, a structure meant to be walked, explored, experienced. One encourages you to look upward, to feel small beneath its weight. The other invites you inward, to lose yourself in its endless design. Both bring awe, but of different kinds. The awe of immensity versus the awe of intricacy. Herodotus was a man of stories, not mathematics. He measured the world not with rulers, but with impressions. To him, what mattered was not height or volume, but experience. And the labyrinth offered an experience like no other, a journey that seemed endless, an unfolding of wonder after wonder. This was why he declared it greater than the pyramids, not because it was physically larger, but because it left a deeper imprint on the mind. Consider how this reflects the human spirit. We are impressed by size, yes, but even more by complexity. A single towering structure may amaze us once, but a structure filled with endless variety amazes us again and again. The labyrinth embodies that endlessness. It teaches us that wonder can be found not only in what is vast, but also in what is intricate, in the unfolding of countless small marvels that together create something beyond comprehension. For sleep, let the comparison drift gently in your thoughts. The pyramid is like the steady rhythm of your breathing, constant and unchanging. The labyrinth is like your drifting mind, wandering through memories, opening one door after another. Both lead you toward stillness, but in different ways. Both invite surrender, whether to the immovable weight of stone or to the endless turns of imagination. Herodotus may have exaggerated, or perhaps the labyrinth truly was as magnificent as he claimed. Either way, his words remind us that greatness does not always mean height or mass. Sometimes greatness lies in intricacy, in variety, in the sense that no matter how much you explore, there is still more to discover. That is the greatness of the labyrinth, the reason he placed it above even the pyramids. And so we carry the image forward. Pyramids rising into the sky, silent and immovable, and beside them, unseen but imagined. The labyrinth sprawling outward, filled with corridors and chambers. Both stand as wonders, yet Herodotus chose the latter as the greater. Tonight, as you drift deeper, let them both rest in your thoughts. The mountain of stone and the maze of halls, two visions of eternity in the desert of Egypt, two different pathways into mystery and peace. After Herodotus laid down his account of the labyrinth, others followed in his footsteps, eager to see if such a marvel truly existed. His words spread across the ancient world, and centuries later, travelers and historians spoke again of the mysterious halls near Lake Moeris. The Greek geographer Strabo writing in the 1st century before our era, described it as a structure of astonishing size, built close to a pyramid that served as a tomb. His account, though briefer, affirmed what Herodotus had suggested. The labyrinth was not a myth, but a real building, one that inspired awe in those who saw its remains. For Strabo, its grandeur lay not in delicate decoration, but in sheer scale, a vast complex where one could easily lose all sense of orientation. Strabo's testimony matters because he was not known for wild exaggeration. He sought to measure the earth, to map its lands, to describe it with rational clarity. That he too was impressed by the labyrinth suggests that something extraordinary did indeed once stand in the Fayum, he admitted. However, that by his time, the labyrinth had already suffered from decay. Centuries of wind, sand, and human hands had worn away its perfection. Still, the remains were enough to confirm its existence, to anchor Herodotus's dream in physical stone. Pliny the Elder, the Roman encyclopedist writing in the 1st century of our era, also spoke of the labyrinth. In his natural history, he described it as an architectural marvel so intricate that it gave its name to all labyrinths thereafter. He spoke of winding passages, hidden chambers, and artistry beyond compare. For Pliny, the labyrinth stood as one of the greatest works of human hands, alongside the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the Colossus of Rhodes. Though he relied partly on earlier accounts, his words kept the legend alive, assuring that Rome too inherited Egypt's mystery. Diodorus Siculus, another historian, claimed that the labyrinth was built as a gathering place for Egypt's judges and priests, a house of records where the nation's wisdom was preserved. This interpretation painted the building not only as a tomb or temple, but as a center of administration, a monument of order. If true, then the labyrinth may have been both sacred and practical, a building where the affairs of the living were conducted under the shadow of eternity. Such a dual purpose would explain its size, its countless chambers meant to house records and rituals alike. Yet, as the centuries turned, the labyrinth began to fade. Later travelers found only scattered stones, fragments of walls half buried in sand. The massive structure that once rivaled the pyramids became a quarry for new buildings, stones carried away to villages and temples. What Herodotus and Strabo had seen was slowly dismantled, piece by piece, until little remained. The legend endured in words, but the monument itself dissolved into absence. Imagine for a moment, standing in that region centuries after Herodotus. The lake glitters in the distance, the reeds sway, and a few scattered stones lie half buried in sand. A villager might tell you that once, here, kings built a house of endless halls. A traveler might repeat the words of ancient writers, pointing at the stones as proof, yet the grandeur is gone, replaced by silence. The labyrinth becomes not a building, but a memory carried by those who recall its story. This slow fading is what gives the labyrinth its peculiar power. Unlike the pyramids, which remain visible to this day, the labyrinth vanished into rumor. It exists for us mainly in texts, in the voices of Herodotus, Strabo, Pliny, and Diodorus. Each writer added his own shade, his own interpretation, until the building itself became secondary to the idea of it. Perhaps it is this very absence that keeps it alive, for the mind is drawn more strongly to what cannot be fully grasped. During the Middle Ages, when much of classical knowledge was preserved in Arabic texts, the story of the labyrinth was repeated again. Scholars in Cairo and travelers in the region spoke of great ruins at Hawara, sometimes connecting them with the labyrinth of Herodotus, but by then, only fragments remained, too worn to convey the grandeur once described. The legend survived as a whisper, carried through the centuries, waiting for rediscovery in the age of archaeology. The Renaissance revived interest in ancient marvels, and European scholars began to gather every reference to the labyrinth they could find. They drew sketches, reconstructed its form from texts, and debated whether it had truly been as immense as claimed. To them, the labyrinth was both history and inspiration, a reminder that the ancients had built wonders greater than their own imaginations could easily contain. Even without ruins to study, they held the story close, weaving it into maps and treatises, keeping alive the sense of mystery that Herodotus had first kindled. As you rest, consider how this chain of voices stretches across time. One man saw and wrote, another confirmed, another expanded, and others speculated. Each added a layer, like chambers added to the labyrinth itself. The building may be gone, but the story grew larger, passed from hand to hand, until it reached us. In this way, the labyrinth became immortal, not in stone, but in memory. There is comfort in this. It reminds us that not all things must endure in the same way. Some monuments stand in stone, others stand in words. The labyrinth may have crumbled, but its presence in history books has kept it alive. When you hear Herodotus speak of its endless chambers, or Strabo of its grand scale, or Pliny of its artistry, you are walking again through its corridors, guided not by priests, but by writers, voices echoing across centuries. So Part 5 leaves us with this thought. The labyrinth may no longer rise from the sands, but it endures in the echoes of those who saw or claim to see its marvels. Each echo carries a piece of its greatness, and together they form a chorus, a soft chant that invites us deeper into mystery. As you drift further into sleep, let that chorus surround you. Herodotus, Strabo, Pliny, Diodorus, and countless others who repeated their words. They are your guides now, leading you not through stone halls, but through halls of memory, where wonder never fades. The pyramids stand, the temples stand. The great statues of Egypt still gaze across the sands, but the labyrinth, said by Herodotus to be greater than them all, is gone. This is the central mystery. How could such a vast structure disappear so completely that only faint ruins remain? It is a question that has troubled historians and travelers for centuries, and it lingers even now. To imagine the vanishing of the labyrinth is to imagine a giant slowly dissolving into mist, leaving behind only footprints in the sand and whispers of its former presence. One explanation lies in the simple passage of time. Egypt has always been a land of reuse, where monuments of one age were dismantled to serve the needs of another. Stone was precious, and a vast building like the labyrinth was an irresistible quarry. Over centuries, its blocks were pried apart, carried away to build homes, mosques, and forts. Bit by bit, what had been a wonder of the ancient world was reduced to scattered fragments, recycled into the fabric of villages and cities. The pyramids, by contrast, were too immense, too solid to be easily dismantled. The labyrinth, sprawling and built of manageable blocks, was far more vulnerable. Another explanation is that the labyrinth was not built to last forever. The pyramids were designed as eternal tombs, sealed and simple in form, their weight holding them firm. The labyrinth was complex, filled with chambers and corridors, roofs supported by slabs, but spread across a wide foundation. Such intricacy makes a structure more fragile. Shifts in the ground, floods from the nearby lake, or centuries of neglect could have weakened it. Where the pyramid endures by simplicity, the labyrinth may have crumbled under its own complexity. Some scholars believe that Herodotus's description was partly shaped by exaggeration or misunderstanding. Perhaps the labyrinth was grand, but not on the scale he imagined. Later, writers repeating his words may have magnified it further, until it became something more dream than stone. In this view, the labyrinth's disappearance is not surprising. It was never as immense as claimed. What crumbled into ruins may have been no greater than other temples of the Middle Kingdom. Impressive, but not superhuman. The wonder, then, lies less in the stones than in the words that describe them. Yet excavations at Hawara in the 19th century revealed foundations that suggested a building of unusual scale. The archaeologist Flinders Petrie found massive stone blocks and outlines of chambers that hinted at a sprawling complex. Though weathered and worn, these traces seem to confirm that something extraordinary once stood there. Near the pyramid of Amenemhat III, if these were indeed the remains of the labyrinth, then Herodotus's words were not invention. They were the echoes of something real, something that time and human hands erased from the surface. Imagine walking across that site today. The sun beats down, the sand crunches underfoot, and all that greets you are scattered stones and faint outlines of walls. You would never guess that this was once the most impressive building in Egypt. Greater even than the pyramids in Herodotus's eyes. This dissonance between past and present creates the sense of mystery. The idea that beneath the silence of the desert lies a memory too great to reconcile with what we see. The labyrinth has vanished, yet it haunts the place still, like a ghost pressing against the edges of perception. Historians debate not only why the labyrinth vanished, but also why it was built in the first place. If it was truly meant as a house of records, then its destruction erased not just architecture, but knowledge. If it was a gathering place for kings, then its ruin erased a symbol of unity. If it was chiefly a tomb, then dismantling it was an act against the memory of rulers. In all cases, its disappearance feels like a wound in history, a gap that cannot be filled. The loss of the labyrinth also speaks to a deeper truth, that no matter how mighty human creations are temporary, time wears down stone, winds scatter sand, rivers shift their courses. What seems eternal in one age may be dust in another. To dwell on the labyrinth is to feel both awe at what humans can build and humility at how little survives. It is a reminder that endurance belongs not to monuments but to memory and story. For sleep, think of the labyrinth's vanishing as a gentle fading, not a violent destruction. Picture it standing proudly for centuries, its courts filled with footsteps, its chambers echoing with voices. Then imagine the centuries stretching further, the roofs beginning to crack, the walls slowly sinking, the lake rising and receding, the sand drifting in. Bit by bit, the building empties, its stone taken away, its halls forgotten, until one day, nothing remains but silence, and the labyrinth exists only in words. This slow fading gives the labyrinth its dreamlike quality. Unlike the pyramids, which confront us with their solidity, the labyrinth invites us to imagine what is no longer there. It is a monument of absence, a wonder of memory. To walk through it now, you must close your eyes, follow the words of Herodotus, and let the imagination build the walls again. In this sense, the labyrinth has not vanished at all, it lives wherever it is remembered. Historians argue over details. Was it built by Amenhotep III or earlier kings? Did it hold the tombs of 12 rulers? Or was that a priestly tale? Was it truly filled with 3,000 rooms? Or was that a poetic exaggeration? Each answer offered only leads to more questions, like chambers leading to further chambers. In this way, even the scholarly debate mirrors the labyrinth itself, twisting and turning without end. The mystery is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be lived. And so, we come to the heart of the labyrinth's vanishing. It is not just a physical absence, but a symbol. It stands for all that is lost to time, all that once was great but cannot be touched again. It is a reminder that the past is both fragile and eternal. Fragile in stone, eternal in memory. Tonight, as you let your mind drift, think of the labyrinth not as gone, but as hidden, sealed beneath sand and silence, waiting in the imagination, where it remains as vivid as ever. Centuries after Herodotus described the labyrinth, and long after later writers had repeated his words, the sands of Egypt swallowed its stones. For generations, the building survived only in memory, whispered in texts and copied into manuscripts. But in the 19th century, when archaeology as a science began to flourish, curiosity about the labyrinth revived. Explorers from Europe, driven by equal parts scholarship and wonder, set their eyes on the Fayum region, near the pyramid of Amenhotep III at Hawara. They came with shovels, notebooks, and dreams, eager to see whether the words of Herodotus and Strabo might be proven true by what still lay hidden beneath the sand. The earliest modern travelers to the site reported only scattered ruins, blocks of stone that seemed out of place, half buried near the pyramid. But even these fragments inspired speculation. The sheer size of some blocks suggested that they had once belonged to something vast, far beyond an ordinary temple. Scholars debated whether these were truly remnants of the labyrinth or merely later constructions. The uncertainty only deepened the fascination. The labyrinth remained what it had always been, half real, half imagined. In the mid-19th century, the German archaeologist Karl Richard Lepsius conducted surveys in Egypt, and he turned his attention to Hawara. Lepsius believed he had found traces of the labyrinth described by Herodotus. He noted foundations and walls that hinted at a massive rectangular complex. Though time had destroyed much, the outlines were enough to suggest that a building of unusual scale had once stood there. His reports rekindled scholarly debate, giving weight to the idea that the labyrinth had been real and that its ghost still lingered beneath the desert floor. Later in the century, the famed British archaeologist Flinders Petrie arrived at Hawara. Petrie was meticulous. known for his careful measurements and attention to detail. He excavated near the Pyramid of Amenhotep, the third and uncovered evidence of a vast platform. It's built of stone that stretched across a wide area. He found fragments of columns, broken blocks, and traces of passages. Though little remained standing, the scale of the foundations impressed him. He concluded that this was indeed the site of the labyrinth, though time and quarrying had reduced it to rubble. Imagine Petrie at work in the hot Egyptian sun, brushing sand from massive stones, measuring their dimensions, piecing together a puzzle that spanned millennia. Round him, the desert stretched silent, indifferent to his labor. Each block he uncovered was a whisper from the past, reminder that once here, kings had built something to rival the pyramids. Yet the silence of the ruins was as loud as their presence, for what remained was only the faintest shadow of what Herodotus described. Petrie's work confirmed that a great building had stood at Hawara, but it also made clear that almost nothing of it survived. The labyrinth was gone, dismantled in antiquity, its stones carried away. The outlines of its foundation, stretching nearly 1,000 feet in one direction, suggested scale but not intricacy. The endless chambers, the decorated walls, the sealed tombs described by Herodotus were no longer visible. The imagination was needed to fill the gaps. It deepened it. Some scholars have argued that the labyrinth was never as complex as Herodotus claimed, that what he saw was a grand administrative building of the Middle Kingdom designed for ceremony and storage rather than endless wandering. Others insist that the foundation's size and scattered remains prove it was indeed vast and intricate, though its details are lost. This debate mirrors the labyrinth itself, a structure of many chambers, where one explanation leads to another, where certainty is always just beyond reach. In the 20th century, further surveys of Hawara used new techniques. Aerial photography and ground-penetrating methods hinted at subsurface features, suggesting that more of the labyrinth might lie buried than visible on the surface. Patterns in the ground revealed rectangular outlines and divisions that could correspond to halls and chambers. Yet excavation is slow, and the site remains largely unexplored. The sands still guard their secret, reluctant to give up what remains. To this day, archaeologists return to Hawara with hope. Each season of research adds another fragment. A broken column here, carved stone there, small pieces of a puzzle whose picture remains incomplete. The labyrinth continues to resist full discovery. It lingers just at the edge of knowledge, visible enough to confirm it was real, invisible enough to remain mysterious. This balance keeps it alive, both scientifically and imaginatively. For those who stand at the site today, the feeling is one of haunting. The Pyramid of Amenhotep III rises nearby, its weathered stones still visible, while the ground around it shows traces of walls long gone. You may see only dust and fragments, but if you close your eyes, the words of Herodotus return. You can almost hear footsteps echoing in endless chambers, voices whispering of kings and crocodiles, shadows flickering against carved walls. The site becomes not just archaeology, but memory reawakened. There is comfort in this blend of science and story. The archaeologist with his measuring tape and the dreamer with closed eyes are not so different. Both seek to walk the labyrinth again, one through stone, the other through imagination. Both are guided by fragments, piecing together a vision from what remains. In this way, the labyrinth continues to serve its ancient role. It invites us inward, into a maze of questions where every answer opens onto another passage. So part 7 closes with this thought. The labyrinth has been found, and yet not found. Its foundations lie at Hawara, its stones scattered across Egypt, its image preserved in words, remains at once real and unreal, tangible and dreamlike. For the archaeologist, it is a challenge. For the dreamer, it is a gift. Tonight as you rest, let yourself be both. The one who kneels to brush sand from ancient stone, and the one who walks through halls that no longer stand, guided by memory, mystery, and the gentle promise of wonder. A labyrinth is never just a building. Across cultures, it has always carried meanings deeper than its stone. In the Greek tradition, familiar to Herodotus, the labyrinth was the prison of the Minotaur, a place where one entered but could not escape without guidance. It symbolized danger, confusion, and mystery. In Egypt, however, the labyrinth described by Herodotus carried a different weight. It was not a prison, but a palace. Not a trap, but a monument. Its countless chambers suggested not fear but order, a reflection of the complexity of life, death, and kingship. To see the Egyptian labyrinth as a mere maze is to miss its greater role as a symbol of the world itself. It's vast, layered, and filled with hidden meanings. Imagine the Egyptian priests leading Herodotus through those halls, pointing to carvings on the walls, explaining their gods and their stories. Each chamber may have stood for a principle of order, each court for a region of Egypt, each passage for a path through life or the afterlife. In this way, the labyrinth becomes not only a building, but a teaching tool, a sacred text written in stone rather than ink. Just as the Nile's flood mapped the rhythm of the seasons, the labyrinth may have mapped the rhythm of existence, showing how all paths, however winding, lead toward eternity. The sealed lower chambers, said to hold tombs of kings and crocodiles, deepen this symbolism. Death itself was part of the design, hidden beneath the surface, yet inseparable from the whole. The Egyptians saw life and death as connected, one leading into the other like corridors in a maze. To live was to walk the upper halls. To die was to descend into the chambers below. The labyrinth therefore embodied the unity of life and afterlife, of human and divine, of seen and unseen. Labyrinths elsewhere carried similar meanings. In Crete, the labyrinth of Minos symbolized the trials of life and the need for guidance. In later Europe, labyrinth patterns were carved into cathedral floors, inviting pilgrims to walk them as meditations. Across cultures, the labyrinth always represents a journey, difficult, confusing, yet purposeful. The Egyptian labyrinth fits into this broader human pattern. It shows that long before Europe carved labyrinths in stone or myth, Egypt had already built one into its desert, embodying the path of kings, priests, and souls. For Herodotus, the labyrinth may also have been a symbol of knowledge itself. He often wrote of being told one thing by priests, another by common people, and a third by his own observations. Egypt was a labyrinth of stories, each leading in different directions, each requiring patience to follow. The building he saw mirrored his own experience of the country. Vast, bewildering, layered, filled with chambers of truth and chambers of rumor. To describe the labyrinth was, in a way, to describe Egypt itself. There is another layer of meaning: unity. The priests told Herodotus that the labyrinth had been built by 12 kings ruling Egypt together. Whether or not this was true, the symbolism is clear. Each king contributed a part, but together they formed a whole. Just as each court and corridor formed part of the greater building. The labyrinth thus symbolized harmony, the weaving together of many into one. In this sense, it was not just a monument of stone, but a monument of cooperation, reminding those who walked it that Egypt's strength lay in unity. For sleep, let the labyrinth become a mirror of your own thoughts. Each chamber is a memory, each corridor a path of feeling, each court a space of reflection. As you wander through them, you may feel lost, but remember, every path has meaning, and every turn leads somewhere. The labyrinth is not meant to trap you. It is meant to carry you gently inward, toward rest. Its design, whether in Egypt or in your imagination, is a guide toward peace. In later centuries, writers and artists continued to draw on the labyrinth as a symbol of mystery and wisdom. Medieval monks saw it as a pilgrimage in miniature, a way to walk toward God without leaving their cloisters. Renaissance thinkers saw it as a symbol of hidden truth, knowledge concealed in twists and turns. Each age used the labyrinth to express what could not be spoken directly, that life itself is a journey without a straight path, filled with challenges, yet ultimately leading to a center of meaning. The Egyptian labyrinth is unique because it blended symbolism with scale. It was not a drawing on a floor or a myth in a story. It was a real structure, immense and physical, that embodied the very idea of the labyrinth. To enter it was to step into a living symbol, to walk through philosophy made stone. That is why Herodotus could not forget it, and why later generations still return to his words. It was not only an architectural wonder, but also a vision of life itself. Even in ruins, the symbolic power endures. At Hawara, where little remains, the idea of the labyrinth lingers like a presence in the air. Visitors still speak of feeling the weight of history there, of sensing that something vast once stood upon that ground. The imagination supplies what the stones no longer provide. In this way, the labyrinth continues to act as a symbol, not of confusion, but of memory, of the way the past weaves itself into the present. Herodotus may not have understood all the meanings the Egyptians attached to the labyrinth, but he felt their weight. His awe, preserved in words, is itself symbolic. It shows how humans across time respond to mystery with wonder, and how wonder itself is a form of understanding. You do not need to solve a labyrinth to learn from it. Sometimes walking its halls, or simply imagining them, is enough. So part 8 leaves us with this thought. The labyrinth of Egypt was more than a building. It was a symbol of unity, of life and death, of knowledge and order. It joined the visible and the hidden, the real and the imagined. Tonight, as you rest, let the labyrinth become your symbol too. A gentle reflection of your own journey, winding and intricate, yet leading always inward, toward stillness, peace, and the center of quiet sleep. Though the stones of the labyrinth crumbled, its story lived on, carried by the words of Herodotus, Strabo, and Pliny. Like a seed planted in the imagination, it grew across cultures, shaping myths, inspiring artists, and offering a symbol that outlasted its physical form. Wherever the idea of a labyrinth appeared, in Greek legend, in medieval cathedrals. In Renaissance art, the Egyptian labyrinth stood in the background, an older ancestor whose shadow stretched across time. Its influence is not always direct, but it is always present. Woven into the human fascination with mystery and endless design. In Greece, the story of the labyrinth found resonance with the myth of Minos and the Minotaur. Though the Greek myth predated Herodotus's travels, his description of a real Egyptian labyrinth gave the legend new depth. Readers could now believe that such buildings were not purely mythic, but possible, even tangible. The Egyptian labyrinth thus served as a bridge between myth and history, giving the Greek imagination a foundation of stone beneath its stories. For centuries after, scholars would compare the two, wondering whether the tale of Minos was inspired by reports of Egypt, or whether Egypt itself had drawn on an older, shared tradition of maze-like architecture. In Rome, the labyrinth was a subject of fascination for writers and builders alike. Roman villas sometimes included labyrinth mosaics. Intricate patterns meant both as decoration and as a symbol of order hidden within complexity. Though these patterns were inspired partly by Greek myth, the echoes of Herodotus's Egyptian labyrinth lingered. To walk across such mosaics was to walk a miniature version of the great wonder once described near Lake Moeris, symbolic link to Egypt's grandeur. As centuries passed and Europe entered the medieval age, the labyrinth found new life in cathedrals. On the floors of Chartres, Amiens, and other great churches, intricate labyrinth designs were set in stone, meant not for confusion, but for meditation. Pilgrims walked them slowly, tracing the winding path as a spiritual journey toward God. Though these Christian labyrinths were distant in time and meaning from the Egyptian monument, they carried the same core idea, that the labyrinth was not only a physical design, but a symbol of life's journey, filled with turns yet leading inward to truth. In art and literature of the Renaissance, the labyrinth became a motif of mystery and human striving. Painters depicted mythic labyrinths, poets wrote of mazes of love and fate, architects experimented with garden labyrinths where nobles might wander. Beneath all these forms lay the same archetype, the fascination with corridors that twist, paths that double back, and centers hidden from sight. Scholars of the Renaissance, eager to recover ancient knowledge, read Herodotus's words anew and debated the true form of the Egyptian labyrinth, sketching speculative reconstructions. The lost building became both inspiration and puzzle, a ghost that haunted their imagination. In the Enlightenment, when reason and order were prized, the labyrinth became a metaphor for human thought. Philosophers described the mind as a maze of ideas, twisting but meaningful, complex, yet leading to understanding. Here too, the Egyptian labyrinth played its part, as scholars looked back at Herodotus' description and saw in it not only architecture, but a mirror of the human condition. To lose oneself in its halls was like losing oneself in questions of philosophy, emerging wiser for the wandering. In modern times, the labyrinth appears in novels, films, and art installations, continuing its long journey through culture. Writers use it as a symbol of mystery, filmmakers as a stage for suspense, artists as a metaphor for life's intricacy. Though these creations often draw more directly on the Greek myth, the Egyptian labyrinth remains in the background as the first great real labyrinth recorded in history. It reminds us that behind every story of mazes and winding paths lies a memory of something once built in stone, greater even than pyramids in its impression. Archaeologists, too, have been influenced by the labyrinth's legend. Expeditions to Egypt in the 19th and 20th centuries often began with the dream of rediscovering what Herodotus described. The very act of searching, of digging in the sands of Hawara, carried symbolic weight. To uncover the labyrinth was not just to recover a building, but to rejoin a story told across millennia. The fascination was never merely scientific. It was cultural, spiritual, almost personal. Each archaeologist who brushed sand from a fragment of stone was also brushing dust from the memory of humankind. Even beyond Egypt, labyrinths became a part of landscapes. In the gardens of Europe, hedge labyrinths were designed for leisure and wonder, inviting nobles to wander their paths. These green mazes were playful, yet they echoed something older and more solemn, the all Herodotus felt as he walked endless stone corridors. In this way, the Egyptian labyrinth spirit traveled far beyond its desert birthplace, shaping not just monuments but landscapes of play and imagination. For sleep, consider how the labyrinth lives not in one culture, but in all. It is an archetype, a symbol that humanity returns to again and again. Each age reshapes it, as myth, as meditation, as art, as puzzle. And yet beneath these many forms lies the same root, the memory of endless corridors, of chambers without number, of mystery carved into stone. The Egyptian labyrinth gave this archetype its first true form, and in doing so, it gave all later labyrinths a lineage to follow. Herodotus could not have imagined how far his words would travel. He simply wrote what he saw and heard, yet his account became the seed for centuries of wonder. Every cathedral labyrinth, every painted maze, every story of a twisting path carries, in some hidden way, the echo of his Egyptian journey. The labyrinth became not just Egypt's monument, but the world's. It belongs now to all cultures, all imaginations. So part 9 closes with this reflection. The labyrinth endures not in stone, but in influence. It is present in myth and mosaic, in cathedral floors and garden hedges. In philosophy and art, it is a symbol too powerful to vanish, a design too universal to be forgotten. Tonight, as you drift deeper, let the labyrinth expand in your thoughts, not as a single building, but as a thread woven through human culture, guiding us all toward wonder across ages and lands, from Egypt's sands to your own quiet dreaming. We have walked far. From Herodotus's first astonished words, through the echo of later travelers, through the silence of ruins and the whispers of archaeologists, the labyrinth has accompanied us like a shadow. Now, as the story draws to a close, the building itself remains as elusive as ever. We cannot see it. We cannot touch it. We cannot measure its halls or count its chambers, and yet somehow we know it. It lives in us as surely as it lived in the pages of Herodotus. Its absence is not emptiness, but presence of another kind, the presence of wonder that survives when stone has gone. The pyramids endure by standing firm against time. The labyrinth endures by slipping into mystery. In this way, the two monuments complement each other. One solid, one vanishing. One visible, one imagined. Together they teach us that human greatness is not only in what we can measure, but also in what we cannot fully grasp. To build a pyramid is to say, this is eternal. To build a labyrinth is to say, eternity is hidden, and you must walk to find it. One gives certainty, the other gives mystery, and perhaps it is mystery that lingers longer in the heart. Close your eyes and imagine again standing at its threshold. The sand is warm beneath your feet, the walls rise before you, and the gates open inward. You take the first step inside, and immediately the world shifts. Islands folds around you. Corridors stretch ahead. Chambers open like petals of a flower. You are no longer in Egypt, no longer in time. You are in the labyrinth, the timeless maze of memory and dream. You walk not with priests, but with the imagination itself, and each turn leads you deeper into stillness. There is no minotaur here, no monster lurking in shadows. The Egyptian labyrinth is not a place of fear, but of awe. Its countless chambers are not traps, but invitations. Each one whispers, "Come, rest here for a while." Each corridor says, "There is more to see, but no hurry." In this way, the labyrinth becomes not a puzzle to solve, but a rhythm to follow. To walk, it is to move at the pace of breath, slow and gentle, one step leading naturally to the next. As you drift, think of the sealed lower chambers that Herodotus never saw. They remain closed, their tombs of kings and crocodiles hidden forever. Yet their very secrecy is part of the gift. Life itself is like that. Some rooms we visit, others we only imagine. Some truths are shown, others remain hidden. The labyrinth teaches us to be at peace with this, to accept that not everything must be revealed. Mystery itself can be a companion, steady and calming, like the soft hum of night. The labyrinth also reminds us of unity. Whether or not it was truly built by 12 kings, it carries the idea that many parts can form a whole. Each court, each chamber, each corridor mattered only as part of the greater design. And so it is with us. Our days and memories may feel scattered, but together they form a pattern. The labyrinth whispers that nothing is wasted, that every path has meaning, that even turns and detours are part of the whole. Think too of the way the labyrinth vanished. Stones were carried off, its halls erased, yet the story remained. This is how memory works. We lose details, but keep impressions. We forget the shape of a room, but remember how it felt. We cannot retrace every step, but we remember that we walked. The labyrinth becomes a symbol of this kind of memory. Incomplete, but still powerful. What matters is not what has been lost, but what remains. The sense of awe, the echo of wonder. The peace of knowing that something greater than us once existed. For sleep, let the labyrinth become a dreamscape. Each chamber is a breath. Each corridor is a slow turn of thought. Each court is a pause, a resting place where silence gathers like cool shade. You do not need to reach the end, for there is no end. The journey itself is the gift. To walk the labyrinth in your mind is to let go of urgency, to move with calm curiosity, to accept that the way forward is winding and gentle. Across the ages, writers, travelers, archaeologists, and dreamers have all entered the labyrinth in their own way. Some with pens, some with shovels, some with imagination. Each found something different, yet none found its end. This tells us that the labyrinth is not only a building, but a reflection of ourselves. We are all labyrinths, filled with chambers of memory, hidden rooms of feeling, sealed tombs of secrets, and endless passages of thought. To know the labyrinth is to know ourselves, mysterious, intricate, and beautiful in our complexity. And so the labyrinth is greater than the pyramids, not because of stone or scale, but because it lives where stone cannot. It lives in story, it lives in mystery, it lives in the quiet turning of the mind at rest. Even if not a single stone remained, it would still be here, waiting in words. It's waiting in imagination, waiting in the soft hours of night. That is its true greatness. Not its architecture, but its ability to endure where no monument should endure, in the fragile but eternal realm of human wonder. You have walked beside Herodotus, listened to priests, heard the echoes of later travelers, watched the archaeologists brush dust from stones, and felt the symbolic weight of corridors that stretch without end. The labyrinth has been many things: a building, a story, a memory, a mirror. It has led you outward into history and inward into yourself. Now it leads you gently toward rest, toward the still chamber at the center where all paths meet and all questions fall silent. So let part 10 close not with an ending, but with a pause. Imagine standing in the innermost chamber of the labyrinth, where the air is cool, the walls quiet, the silence deep. There is nothing more to seek, nothing more to know. You are at the center, and the journey is complete. The labyrinth has done its work. It has led you here to stillness, to peace, to the soft embrace of sleep. Rest now in the mystery that remains, knowing that some wonders need not be solved, only cherished.